It's good to see everyone here this morning. I hope you're all doing well. We're continuing our class on the subject of worship, and we're talking about this week worship under the old law. And we'll probably be on this for a couple of weeks. There's a lot of material to cover, and I'm not going to cover all of it. This is going to be a very kind of high level, high view of it. Not high as in positive. It'll be positive too, but like just an overview of it, kind of a survey of Old Testament worship, just because there's so much there, and we could spend a lot of time studying it. And there's a lot of material that we can cover. But anyway, getting started. Last week we covered the basic introduction to this lesson, so we're just going to dive right in. The laws of worship. God led the children of Israel out of Egypt and declared them to be His special people. And I think I mentioned this last week, but when we think about the Old Testament, we have to remember that the Old Testament was for a specific people for a specific amount of time. So I've heard people many times ask, what about the Gentiles? What about what they had? And the fact of the matter is, we just don't have specifics to what they dealt with, what they had to deal with. We have some pretty good ideas. Most scholars, most people think that they were still under the patriarchal system up until the New Testament times, and that's probably true. We know that they had a law because God held them accountable for their actions, and so we know that there was law for them, but it might be, again, like the patriarchal system where the law was understood. So we won't get into that just yet. We might cover it a little bit later. But God led them there to Mount Sinai to give them the law. He made a covenant with them, Exodus 34, verses 28 and 29. Exodus 34, 28 and 29. If I get the right spot. Talking about Moses, it says, "And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water, and he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he walked with him." There's a whole sermon's worth of material just in those 2 statements there. We won't get into that today, but the fact that God's interaction with Moses, or rather Moses' interaction with God, produced this shining face. And Moses didn't even realize it. But the short sermon is that when we spend time with God, people will know. It'll be something that people can see in us, even if we don't necessarily see it in ourselves. And so there's a lesson that we can take from that. But anyway, that's 1 minute worth of a 40-minute sermon that I have. While there are some practices that happened before the law of Moses, things like sacrifices and stuff like that, the law of Moses gets into more detail as to how these things worked. Either God made more specific instructions regarding them, or at least were revealed those things to us. Animal sacrifices being one example. We assume that there are animal sacrifices under the patriarchal system. In fact, we don't have to assume, just read Job, and he did that. But now we learn some of the specifics of how that worked in the law of Moses. As we read through the law of Moses, we don't see anything about singing or praying or reading Scripture on a weekly basis like we practice in the New Testament, not specifically anyway. This practice did formulate over time, and when we get to that section, we'll talk about the synagogue worship and how synagogue worship is very similar to New Testament worship. Now, I'm not saying that they didn't have praying or singing and those things under the Old Testament, but their system of worship, their pattern of worship was much different from what we have today. So, we assemble on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, every week. It was different for them. The Sabbath day, a lot of our religious neighbors and some of our religious neighbors believe that the Sabbath day is Sunday, and it's not. The Sabbath day is Saturday, and it wasn't the day that they came together to worship. It was the day that they were supposed to refrain from labor. And so this is an important point that I think a lot of religious people don't get. When I first obeyed the gospel, I thought Sabbath was Sunday. Yes, sir.
So, John, to expand upon that, because I never really thought about this thought. So, a lot of their observances of holidays, sacrifices, and all of that, I guess it really didn't happen on the Sabbath.
I don't believe so. I think everything was centered, not centered around that, but kind of excluded that. Yeah, I was going to say conveniently, but that doesn't sound right. It was by design that they would have that time for that purpose.
As far as we don't have any evidence of them worshiping on the Sabbath,
Correct. Yeah, there's nothing in the scriptures that suggests they were supposed to, as far as I know, as far as I've studied. So it was specifically for that time of rest. And I think the reason I point this out is that it's just, there's a lot of confusion that people have. They assume Sabbath means Sunday. I think there is a lesson there for us in that, there was a special day, well, there are several special days under the Old Testament system, but there was a special time for them to specifically not engage in any work. And maybe that was kind of preparing their minds and to help prepare for this idea of that one special day of the week being the Lord's Day under the New Testament system. I'm not sure. That might be a stretch, but under the Old Testament, we'll look at this too as we talk about the feasts and stuff. They had a lot of special days. They had a lot of days they had to remember. Be grateful that we don't have to do that. Your Google Calendar would be full of things. But anyway, if you use Google Calendar. Their focus of worship is the same as it's always been, same as it was before and it was after, or is after. God confronted Moses with his, I'm going to use the phrase majestic awesomeness because I can't think of a bigger way to describe God. And when I say awesomeness, not, awesome like Surfer Dude awesome, but awesome like in the real sense of the word, awe-inspiring. To stand before God, to behold God in a manifestation as Moses did, one cannot be but in awe. But he did that so that Moses would know who he was, would recognize him, and with his, in order to prepare Moses for this, God manifested himself to Moses. He identifies himself in Exodus chapter 3 as the great I am, or the I am that I am. The English rendering of this word, you've probably heard the word Yahweh before, or the word Jehovah before, and those are attempts at a transliteration. A transliteration is when you just try to do letter for letter. Baptism is an example of a transliteration. The Greek word for baptism is baptism, or roughly. It's baptismos, but the letters are one for one switched over to English. Well, the problem with that is in Hebrew, there are no vowels. So when you read Hebrew, you understand the vowel sounds by seeing what they call them jots and tittles, kind of like the dot on an I and a cross on a T. And if you ever get a chance to look at Hebrew, if you can make anything out of it without having training, talk to me because I can't. Hebrew is, well, it's like another language or something. But it's a difficult language to comprehend. But it doesn't have vowel letters like English does. English has A, E, I, O, U as our vowels. And so Yahweh and Jehovah are attempts at filling in those vowel letters as best we can. So the phrase, I am that I am, is one word in Hebrew, and it's roughly the word Yahweh or Yahweh. And the interesting fact about this is that the Jews considered the name of God sacred, so they took great care in how they presented it, how they would write it, how often they would even utter it. Exodus chapter 20, verse 7 shows that, they were not to take the Lord's name in vain. That's one of the commandments, right? And then Deuteronomy 5:11 says the same thing. So they took this, I won't say to the extreme, but to the point where they wouldn't even write the name down lest they violate this. And that's why in your older Bibles you'll see Lord in all caps. It is a reflection of that attitude that they had, where they wouldn't write the name Yahweh down or Jehovah down. They would write down Lord, and it was understood that it was a reference to God. The word Lord is translated from the word Adonai. You've probably heard the word Adonai before. Some of our songs and our songbooks use the word Adonai. And so there are a lot of theories as to why the word Yahweh is spelled the way it is. Part of it is because of the word Adonai. The vowels from Adonai were kind of inserted into the word Yahweh. Why Adonai, or why Jehovah and Yahweh? I don't know exactly. The English letter J didn't exist until sometime after the King James was written. So just use that for what you want. I kind of lean toward the Yahweh word just because it seems like it makes more sense. The name for Jesus in the Old Testament is Yeshua or Joshua. So I like that connection personally. There's another time when God appeared to Moses and he showed God the highest reverence by bowing down to the earth and worshiping him, Exodus 34, verses 6 through 8. If you want to read that along with me. I think I might have skipped a section, but we'll just keep going. I'm going to start in verse 5. Sorry to throw you off there. Exodus 34, 5. It says, "And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him," Moses there, "and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon their children's children, unto the third and to the fourth generation. And Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped." The only reason I bring this up is the fact that Moses could not do anything else. In the presence of God, we can't, in this sense, we could not do anything else but bow down and fall before him and worship, show reverence. When we talk about some of the aspects of worship, obviously God transcends his creation. He is greater than his creation. And in Exodus chapter 20, verses 3 through 5, we see that they were forbidden from making any kinds of graven images, any kinds of representations of God, trying to depict God in any way. The children of Israel failed at this multiple times, incidentally. They were influenced by their neighbors, their pagan neighbors, to do that very same thing. Exodus 23 through 5, of course, the Ten Commandments. "Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me." Now, a couple of interesting things from this phrase. First of all, notice he says, if you do this thing, if you make these images and you bow down to them, he equates that with hating him. Now, it should be understood that the word hate in the Bible has kind of a broad meaning, but even still, if we worship God in a way that we are not supposed to, or we put something else in the place of God, even if we think we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, we're hating God if we're worshiping using these images, or at least they were under the system. So I have a discussion question for you. It's actually a closed-ended question, so it's not a good discussion question. But is it wrong for Christians today to venerate images of biblical characters? That is, in an attempt to make worship more meaningful. Should we have images of Jesus, or should we have crosses hanging all over the place? Is that something that we should do in a worship sense? And I'm clarifying that because I'm going to make some statements later. So should we have a cross, a big old cross up here, or a picture of Jesus? You could shake or nod. I'm sorry? According to that, no. Very good, yes. Barry?
Well, that's what I was gonna say as far as, he's told us not to worship anything that we made, you know?
Yep.
Because it's nowhere compared to him. It's something we've made ourselves, and we tend to worship that.
Exactly. And so to parallel this thought, I do want to comment that if you have a depiction of Jesus in your home, I don't know that that would be a violation of this principle. If you wear a crucifix, a cross on a necklace, kind of as a memorial, or you just think it's a pretty piece of jewelry, I don't know that that is a violation of this command. If you feel that it is, then don't do it, most certainly. I'm not a big cross-wearing guy. I don't have any pictures of Jesus in my house, mainly because I don't know what he looked like. The pictures that we see of Jesus are very beautiful, very artistic, and they're just that. They're artistic renderings from an artist's mind. Most of the time, they are very European-centric, Western culture-centric. Sometimes I'll jokingly call them Euro-Jesus because they're a European version of Jesus. Yes?
Well, it might go down to defining an idol, too.
Yes, yeah, and that's why I specified in the question worship, because if you worship the object, then you've created an idol for yourself. And this is what God is talking about in this context. Yes, sir?
I've always found it a little odd that people wear crosses displayed everywhere as a symbol of Christ. What if the electric chair had been relevant at that time? Would we use that symbol?
It's a similar principle.
Wouldn't that seem odd that using the means of his death, other than thinking about what the purpose of all of it was?
Sure. So, again, I try not to be too critical of those who choose to do that. I don't know that, I suppose they could be guilty of that mentality, but I try to assume the best and that they just wear it out of a... Oh, yes, sir.
Don't you think you can take that, and I want to say, that a little far? All these Sunday school books, need to be cleaned out for the books that have pictures like that. If that's, I think, perhaps I'm wrong. I think the best thing that you said about it was if you feel it's wrong, don't do it.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes we can take things to the extreme where we almost isolate folks.
Right, and again, that's why I framed the question the way I did, because, if I had a cross and I thought it had power in and of itself, the object, vampires or whatever, that it warded off evil, that could be a problem. That's not the right attitude, because it doesn't,
Or that the cross saved.
Or would the cross itself, the wearing of it, have any helpful? Yeah, exactly. I love my Bible, but I don't think that it is a magic. This physical book has any magic to it. I love my Bible because of what it says, not because of the physical object. I don't think it would, protect me against evil spirits or whatever. If I know the Bible, if I had this in my house and I never read it, it would do me no good whatsoever. Maybe if I got cold, I could use it for warmth. But
as long as it's not a graven image or a molten image of anything that's in heaven or on earth and water under the earth, as long as it don't fall in that category, it should be fine. But,
yeah, and I think the key is the worship aspect to it. Worshiping an object or putting power into it or believing it has power. I wasn't trying to open up a can of worms or anything, but I did want to point this out because there are some religions out there that do this very thing. They venerate the images themselves. They find the images to be worthy of worship, or people to be worthy of worship. And what this amounts to is idolatry. It is idolatry. If I think that this particular object, whatever it is, a cross, a statue, a picture, a person, and I pray to it, or I approach it as though it has some kind of religious power, it is an idol. Exactly. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. I think that's a good way to illustrate it, is you're putting something in his place where he belongs. And one second, to kind of carry that illustration, I'd like to use this. Let's say, I have my Bible here in front of me, and I could read the Bible and find what God wants me to say. But let's say I decide to put this down and pick up a confession of faith or a catechism. I can't read this and read another book at the same time. I can't follow this and follow something that teaches something different from this at the same time. So I have to put one aside, and that's what he's talking about here when we're talking about idolatry. You're putting God aside for something else. You're replacing God with something. And I like the illustration you made, that it is putting him, taking him out of his place. Barry?
Well, I think it's very specific reasons why we don't have a lot of the artifacts that we read about.
Absolutely.
That would be our nature. to
It-
turn those into
It would be tempting. As human beings, we are, I think, collectors by nature a lot of times. If you come to my house, I have a lot of books. I have a lot of other things that I collect just because I think they're cool. The people who know me are laughing. I had somebody tell me my house looked like a museum, and I was like, oh, that's cool. My house looks like a museum. But anyway, I think human beings are collectors by nature, and it's a danger that we could become obsessive and venerate things beyond what we should. Yes, sir, I saw you.
At one time, before the previous elders, I guess that would be BC before, BB before Mary. We had an unwritten rule that when a speaker comes in, he wasn't to try to sell his books and all like that. If he had them outside himself, setting up a display, the only time that I let that go was one time when a gentleman got here before got the services and set it up before I got to the building. And at that time it would have made a bigger fuss, a bigger distraction for me to say take it down.
Sure.
I never have thought a whole lot of preachers that set up a thing to sell books from what they've researched on the church time.
I understand that.
That's just the word I've got.
Yeah, and I have just a quick comment on that. Any book that you find that is on biblical subjects, and this applies to books or teachers or preachers, it's only as good as much as it references the Bible. If it doesn't point you to the Bible, you might not throw it in the trash, but use it for something actually useful, like a doorstop. Several years ago, I had a lady insist that I read a book about a guy who died and went to heaven for 15 minutes or something, and he reported his findings. She insisted I read it, and I tried. I really tried. But it was just like, I had better things to do. It wasn't even entertaining. If it had been entertaining, I could have been like, okay, put it in the fiction section because it was fiction. But it's just, it wasn't biblically accurate. It was barely biblically adjacent. And we need to be careful about that because there are people, well-meaning people who write books with well-meaning ideas, but they, at best they are parallel to the Bible. But if they don't point back to the Bible, then it's not helping us. It's not benefiting us. I didn't mean to get so far off topic, so I apologize on that. But the summary of all of that is we don't know what Jesus looked like, so we could never make an image of him. We're told not to anyway. No one alive today has seen him in his human form, so there's no point to attempting to try to do that in any religious sense. Again, artistically speaking, that's fine. There's some very beautiful paintings that depict Jesus or depict Mary and angels and whatnot, and they're good for what they are, art and in that. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 14 and 15, and this is kind of getting at the gist of what I was getting at with that question. Again, coming down to our focus of worship being the present topic. He says, "Ye shall not go after other gods, of the gods of the people which are round about you. For the Lord thy God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord thy God be kindled against thee and destroy thee from off the face of the earth." God knows how we are and how we can be tempted to be like the people around us. In fact, you'll become like the people around you whether you want to or not. It just happens. And so unless you focus and avoid doing that, it will happen. And even to some degree, it will happen anyway. And so we have to be very careful, really very careful about with whom we associate ourselves. When it comes to their worship, he left nothing to their discretion. I say nothing, next to nothing, to their discretion. He told them what to do and how he wanted them to do it in nearly every aspect of their worship. He gave them explicit instructions regarding the manner in which they would approach him in all of these different aspects. Who would approach him, how they would approach him, with what they would approach him. He gave them all of the instructions. In the New Testament, he gives us specific instructions as well, or he gives us instructions as well. We just don't have as many details as they had. But again, it comes back to the principles. In the Old Testament, God is teaching the Israelites, but also all of us, something about sin. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we continue on. So when it comes to the place of worship, unlike in the patriarchal age where there seemed to be no specific object or place where they would gather to worship, under the law of Moses, it was centered around the tabernacle and eventually the temple. Under the patriarchal system, they had the altars that they would build, but they could build them anywhere. It wasn't a centralized focus in that sense. And so the tabernacle and the temple, and later on we're going to actually get into some more details about the tabernacle and how it relates as a shadow of the New Testament, but we won't do that right now. The tabernacle and the temple were divided into two sections. There was the holy place. That was the place sanctified for service by the priests. It included the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and golden lampstands. And it was separated by a veil that went into the most holy place. The most holy place is also called the Holy of Holies, most holy place, the holiest of all, and if you like Latin, the Sanctum Sanctorum. I like that. It sounds really cool to me, the Sanctum Sanctorum. In fact, Marvel Comics stole this. Doctor Strange's, his base of operations, he calls the Sanctum Sanctorum. I don't know if that's irreverent or blasphemous or being reverent, but anyway, it still sounds cool to me, and probably sounded cool to Stan Lee when he wrote the comic. So, only the high priest could enter the Sanctum Sanctorum. It housed the Ark of the Covenant, Exodus chapter 20, verse 21. And within the Ark of the Covenant was the stone tablets that had the Ten Commandments written on them, Aaron's rod that budded, and a pot of manna. So, the Ark of the Covenant, the word ark means box. It was a box of the covenant, and it contained literally the Ten Commandments that were the symbol of the covenant, as well as those other elements. Upon the top of the ark, That's when you conflate ark and box together. On top of the ark was the mercy seat, on which were 2 cherubim. What does a cherubim look like? I don't know, except what the Bible says. All I can guess is that either a cherubim manifested itself so that the maker of that mercy seat would know what it looked like, or God gave that person the knowledge to see that being. Or to see a representation of that being. Outside of the tabernacle was what is called the outer court, and in that was the laver. A laver was just basically a big bowl washing basin, a big basin for water, and it was used for the priests. They would have to cleanse themselves before entering into the ark. And if you know a little bit about the New Testament, you can already see what those types and shadows are here. But I'm working on a printout, so I can give you a sheet with all these things on here, and maybe even a PowerPoint slide. But that's I'm not as good at that kind of stuff, so it takes a little while. But and I want to spend time focusing on that all by itself too. So outside also was the altar for the burnt offerings. And that was the outside of the tabernacle, outside of the tabernacle in the outer court, Exodus 30, verses 17 through 20. So if you want to read along with me there. Exodus 30, 17 through 20. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Thou shalt also make a laver of brass, and its foot also of brass, to wash withal, and thou shalt put it between the tabernacle and the congregation and the altar. And thou shalt put water therein. For Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet when they go into the tabernacle of the congregation. They shall wash with water, that they die not, or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn offering made by fire unto the Lord. So they had to do this before they could perform their priestly responsibilities. And so when we talk about the tabernacle, when we look at the time that the Israelites were instructed to have a tabernacle, or given the 10 Commandments, that the law was initiated, there was a time between that and when they actually built what we would call this is an oxymoron, but the permanent tabernacle. Tabernacles by their nature are not permanent. But they had what was called a provisional tabernacle. And this was the tabernacle that existed between the time before they went into the land. And I'll explain this as we go along. If you want to go ahead and open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 33, we'll be looking at a few verses there. But this would be kind of like we'll just read it as we go. This was established after the sin of the golden calf. Some details about this. First of all, that during the time there was a transitional period between in which the tent was pitched outside of the camp. Verse 7, Exodus 33, verse 7. It says, And Moses took the tabernacle and pitched it without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. So this isn't the tabernacle that we usually think of when we think of the Old Testament. This was just kind of like an intermediary, hence the term provisional. It was called the tabernacle of the congregation, as we read, or tabernacle of meeting in some renderings. The New King James has tabernacle of meeting. There was no specific ritual or priesthood at this time, so whenever Moses and the people sought the Lord, they would approach this tabernacle. And so the priesthood hadn't been established quite yet. Verses 8 through 11 of Exodus 33. The second tabernacle is what we call the Sinaitic tabernacle. This is the tabernacle of the Old Testament as we think of it. It was erected in accordance to the directions given by Moses on Mount Sinai, We won't go into all of those details because there's a lot there. It's several chapters worth of information that, that we could probably pick apart, but we won't. But it was, this tabernacle was built by the free will offerings of the people of Israel. If you go to Exodus chapter 36, verses 5 and 6. And there was a lot of materials that were involved in this, a lot of things that were needed for this. And it's kind of a fascinating study all on its own, that they learned how to make these things, or God gave them the instructions on how to make these things. Exodus 36, verses 5 and 6. And they spake unto Moses, saying, the people bring much more than enough for the service of the work which the Lord commanded to make. And Moses gave commandment, and they caused it to be proclaimed throughout the camp, saying, let neither man nor woman make any more work for the offering of the sanctuary. So the people were refrained from bringing. For the stuff that they had was sufficient for all the work to make it, and too much. Which I think is kind of an interesting phrase. God said, all right, people, you're going to have to bring the materials to make this tabernacle. And the people said, yes, sir. And they did, and did more than they actually needed, because they were giving so freely and so willingly, because they wouldn't have the individual would have no concept of like how much. They would just give until they had enough. So I think that's kind of an interesting, there's a lesson, I think, in that, in their attitude toward giving, is that they just gave. They didn't try to refrain or try to hold back, by and large. I'm sure individuals, there might have been some that did that, but this tabernacle was completed on the first month of the second year after the Exodus, and it was basically anointed or brought into service. We can read that in Exodus chapter 40, verse 2. It says, on the first day of the first month shalt thou set up the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation, and thou shalt put therein the ark of the testimony, and cover the ark with the veil. And you can read on the rest of how they anointed the temple. Basically, they started its service, or the temple, or the tabernacle rather, started to be used. This tabernacle traveled with the people, and if you recall, this tabernacle was in the center of the camp rather than outside the camp. And we could there's many chapters that describe the orientation of the 12 tribes as they gathered around the tabernacle. And then, of course, the tribe of Levi was broken up into the four families that were around the tabernacle that did their various services in disassembling and carrying the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant and all of this. And again, for the sake of time, we're not going to go into all those details. If you want those, read Exodus, and Leviticus. So eventually, this tabernacle came to be seated in a place called Shiloh. You've probably heard the name Shiloh before. And it was, let's look at Judges chapter 18, verse 31 to see that. Judges 18. You know what? I might have given you a wrong reference here. Oh, no, okay. It says, and they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time at the house of God was in the house, that the house of God was in Shiloh. So the house of God referenced their idea there being to the tabernacle. And then 19, verse 51. That can't be right, because there is no 51 in Judges 19. So I have a wrong reference there. I'll have to double back and find that. Anyway, it remained in Shiloh for pretty much the whole time, the whole period of the Judges. It wasn't taken out from that location until the time of Eli. And as far as we have record, it never returned to Shiloh. 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, so the people sent to Shiloh that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubims, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were with the Ark of the Covenant of God. And so there are some archaeological excavations at Shiloh that indicate that there was a place that people have a good idea they think is where the Ark was, or where that tabernacle was. And they estimated that it was destroyed around 1050 BC and suspect that this was at the hands of the Philistines, connected with the Battle of Ebenezer, 1 Samuel chapter 4. And then after that, the ark spent some time, and when I say ark, I mean ark and tabernacle together, spent some time in the house of Abinadab in Kirjath Jearim, 1 Samuel chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. And then after that, after Israel reclaimed the ark from the Philistines, it was taken to the house of Obed-edom, the Gittite, and it sat there for 3 months. And then eventually it was taken to the city of David, Jerusalem, and it was kept there until the temple was built. And so the ark moved around quite a bit. Once the people settled in the promised land, settled in Canaan, it kind of stayed at Shiloh while they went out and did their missions. And then they had that whole foolish interaction where the Philistines stole the ark because they used the ark as a magical relic, which God specifically told them not to. There's a good sermon, I didn't write it, but there's a good sermon out there called The Magic Box, and how people started using the ark as a magic box. And sometimes we have our magic boxes, things that we think they make us safe even though they don't have any inherent bearing. You know, I have a Bible on my coffee table. I go to church every Sunday. That doesn't guarantee salvation. You have to, live the life of a Christian. But whoever wrote the sermon used that as the principal idea. So 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verses 12 and 13, it says, "And David was afraid of God that day, saying, 'How shall I bring the ark of God home to me?' So David brought not the ark home to himself to the city of David, but carried it aside into the house of Obed-edom the Gittite. And the ark of God remained with the family of Obed-edom in his house 3 months. And the Lord blessed the house of Obed-edom and all that he had." So the ark just kind of sat there for a while because David was afraid to take it. Interestingly enough, if you continue looking at 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 12, it says, "And it was told King David, saying, 'The Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-edom.'" Wait, Obed-edom. I skipped a syllable there. Obed-edom. "And all that pertaineth unto him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought the ark of God from the house of Obed-edom into the city of David with gladness." So David kind of sent it to this fella because he was afraid to take it, and then he's like, "Oh well, I guess it's okay." And then so he comes and gets it. To me, that's kind of humorous, but also it kind of shows David's humility. He was afraid because he didn't want to do something that would be inappropriate, I suppose. At least that's the assumption I'm making. Very quickly, 2 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 2. "Eventually, Solomon has the ark brought from the tent that David had set up, and he brings it into the temple once the temple is built. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes of the chief of the fathers of the children of Israel unto Jerusalem to bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion." And then from that point onward, it's in the temple. It doesn't leave the temple. They know better than to try to move it from the temple and use it like a magic box. They have their other problems after that, of course. But we'll talk a little bit more about the ark and the tabernacle next time. There's a couple of interesting things that we can examine on that. But thank you all for your time and your attention.